What is going on, all of you amazing gamers out there in the world? I am Mega Am, so thank you for watching this YouTube video. Whether you are a new or returning viewer, I appreciate you stopping by. And today I wanted to talk about, this is actually following a topic that a few of the viewers here, you might know who you are, shout out to all of you. And a few of the viewers and I were talking about in stream the other night in chat, and that was this deep discussion, this talk about certain genres feeling a little fatiguing, mainly because a lot of companies sometimes tend to chase successful trends. And a lot of times, that can result in some unsuccess on there, and sometimes it results in success. It's not a 100% fail average or anything like that. But I wanted to kind of talk about specifically some of the genres that a lot of people tend to find a little fatiguing these days. This is going to be a very dated video, but why it can be a good thing and why it's also obviously not a very good thing. Let's get this one off the bat. So, open world games existed before Breath of the Wild. I don't care what Nintendo's saying, open air, whatever it is. It's a style of open world game. We've seen a lot of studios, especially since Breath of the Wild and its massive success, tried to follow in the same footsteps for other series. I mean, you could even argue some Nintendo series. Like, look at how open Donkey Kong got. Now, that's not a full open world necessarily, but it's obviously making things a lot more open. Kirby tried that a little bit with Forgotten Land, not quite. I mean, Sonic with Sonic Frontiers is a perfect example of that. Ubisoft keeps doing open world. They were kind of like the kings of open world, and then they kept on doing it. And now people are like, all right, Ubisoft, we can chill. It's just one of those things where it all comes down. So pretty much the whole purpose of this video, before we get into other genres as well here, the whole purpose of this is the idea that, why are companies and even just development studios, the same thing happens to indie games, why are a lot of them kind of trying to jump on trends? And it really comes down to the gaming industry being at the heart of capitalism, and the idea that these companies and indie studios alike need or want to make money. And what better way to do that in their mind that's a lot easier and more of a guaranteed success than to not copy necessarily, but to take inspiration from predecessors that were super duper successful. So like, obviously seeing the success of a game like Breath of the Wild, a lot of studios were also developing open world games at that same time, and obviously before, like I mentioned with Ubisoft and other studios. But after the fact, you see lots of these studios jumping on this type of gameplay because they know people love it, they know fans like it, but where's the balance? Where's the point where it becomes too much? Now, to be honest, in my mind, this is really only an issue for hardcore gamers like myself and maybe some of you watching, where we can be so tuned into the game industry, and if we play a lot of varying games, we will notice these patterns more. So open world is definitely a thing, and this is not a knock on Breath of the Wild by any means. Breath of the Wild just made the open world genre explode in popularity. Same thing with, Horizon Zero Dawn. I mean, same thing. That was developed and released right around the same time as well. So that's another game that also just, the timing of that game alongside Breath of the Wild was crazy. Another genre, though, kind of genre, I don't know if you would even call this a genre or more like gameplay model, but the live service game, right? Listen, I know Concord's a dead horse. I know it's a dead horse, but we're going to bring it up because it's relevant for this discussion. Concord came out at a time, at kind of the tail end of the time where Sony was really pushing that live service initiative, right? They had all these games. They had a God of War live service game. They had a Last of Us live service game. They had, I believe, the Spider-Man one with the different Spider people that was canceled. I believe it was canceled. A bunch of those coming out. I mean, Marathon is Sony, and that still seems to be a little more live servicey, and that's still actively in development. Maybe they're trying to scale back some of those elements now. Concord was the epitome of this, where it's a brand new IP that seems to be trying to capitalize on a similar, like the Overwatch crowd, right? Obviously a massive flop. They literally removed the game after a week because it did so poorly. And this is the kind of game you need to be, dedicated to, and need that success off the bat and sustainability to keep it going and to pay for itself, because a lot of money is put into it, even though, it wasn't a free-to-play game, but still. This to me is the epitome of chasing trends, because this was years after the original Overwatch. This was, Overwatch came out in 2016. This was 2024 this game came out, and went the same year. this is the epitome of chasing trends, and the problem is that the game industry, especially AAA studios like Nintendo, like Sony, like Microsoft, I mean Ubisoft, all these companies, games take a lot of money and they take a long time to make for these massive studios because the games are huge. They have all sorts of content, which is cool, but they have all sorts of content and budget behind them, and that none of that matters when you have a player base that's uninterested, right? This was a huge flop for Sony. It was really a big flop. They really pushed this and tried to chase a trend of live service games that, I mean, honestly, at this point is really dominated by Fortnite. And I guess is Roblox a live service? I don't even know. But you still have your established fan bases for games like Overwatch that are still popular because people who played it back in the day are still playing it. And now I don't know how many new people. I would be curious to see the trend, like the statistics of how many new players are jumping in on a game like Overwatch that has an established community. Obviously not as popular as it used to be with new players coming in, but still, you already have an established community. This was a brand new IP for Sony. And literally years after live service established itself, this kind of the fate of this game was written on the wall. It really feels like Sony just pushed this out, but then the fact that they recalled it after a week essentially was crazy. Unfortunate, because like from what I heard, the game itself was actually decent. It just launched way too late. If this launched 5 years prior, I think it would have done way better. And it was a case of Sony trying to chase trends and trying to capitalize on profits there, and it was a huge risk and it did not pay off, you know? Like I said, if it was earlier, it would have done a lot better. I honestly, maybe not still crazy amounts, but I think it still would have done better. Here's a game that I really like. This was my game of the year of last year, 2024, and that is Prince of Persia and the Lost Crown. You might be like, why am I including games like this in here? None of these games I'm saying are bad. I just want to clarify that again. However, Prince of Persia was historically, what would you say, a puzzle platformer, kind of action game platformer? This was a Metroidvania. And Metroidvanias are another genre that I've seen exhausted, especially in the indie scene. Now, here's the thing. I think part of the reason for this perception, as we'll go into, of all of these genres getting overexhausted, you can say one thing about AAA and how they're chasing trends. You could also argue indie games are trying to do that too, because they're also trying to capitalize on a market, and they're trying to obtain appeal that way. A lot of this really comes down to the fact that there are so many games being made today compared to even a decade ago. Like, especially when you include the indie scene, there are thousands of games coming out all the time, many of which have similar gameplay mechanics or are of a similar genre. Like, that is going to happen. And as a result, depending on what kind of games you like, you might feel a little over fatigued by the genres. So really, I feel like this mentality, yes, there is part of it that relies on the chasing trends part because of trying to, you know, it's because the video game industry is in a capitalistic market and is trying to kind of almost find a guaranteed core audience for a game to obviously make profit. Doesn't always work, especially if you're too late chasing a trend. But especially with live service, I think that's especially apparent. But on the flip side, there's so many games being made, and it's almost to a point where, like I said, if you're a hardcore gamer, you're paying more attention to all of these games coming out. I think if you're a more casual fan, you may not notice this, you might not have this fatigue as much. Whereas if you're really paying attention to a lot of the games coming out, it's like, oh my god, there were like 1,000 Metroidvanias, that might even be underballing it, that came out in 2025. How could they make so many games? Well, it's because there's a million games coming out. There's so many games coming out. And I think when you put it into that perspective, yeah, sure, some genres are seemingly more popular than others, for sure. You know, we don't have, from what I can tell, maybe I'm wrong, like 1,000 fighting games coming out in 2025, you know what I mean? But we do have a bunch of Metroidvanias. We have a bunch of open world games. And some live service games definitely trying to capitalize on the market. I'm less familiar with that market, so I don't know how many exactly, but I know there are quite a bit, at least according to Jeff Keighley, and his ads and his award shows. But it's like, a lot of it just comes down to the visibility of it all and being like, there are so many games coming out. You know, you could argue a similar thing in music, right? Oh, there's so many pop songs coming out in this year. You know what I mean? It's like not quite the same comparison, but in a way it kind of is, because if you have more visibility into the industry, like the gaming industry in this case, you might notice a lot of repeating games in terms of game mechanics and genres. One last one I want to jump into here before ending this video is shout out to this game Absolum. I've heard really good things about it. I have not played it. This is a beat 'em up game. But the main reason why I bring this up is because it is a beat 'em up game with roguelike mechanics. And in the indie scene in particular, we've seen a lot of games over the last couple years alone with roguelike mechanics. I mean, hell, I'm playing Ball Pit right now. That is just breakout with roguelike mechanics. We see AAA games. I mean, that game Sony's developing, Saros, seemingly a roguelike game. They're hinting at that. Donkey Kong added a roguelike mode with Emerald Rush. People are theorizing that Kirby Air Riders, the Road Trip single-player mode, that game hasn't come out yet at this upload, I'm dating myself, might be a roguelike mode. Like, the thing, it's interesting to see what becomes popular and what not even just indie studios, but AAA studios implement as game mechanics. And I think some of that, I feel like, can come down to just intent on the game developer side. Splatoon 3 side story, another example. But also, like, part of it definitely comes down to chasing trends, because knowing what's popular with players, you know, having insight into the game industry and being like, you know what, this would be a safe bet. Doesn't always work. It really doesn't always work. Now, apparently with Absolum, it works really well. I've heard this is a really, really good game. Shout out to Dotemu. But, you know, it definitely can be a thing that some players might find exhausting. But here's the thing. Going back to that point I just made a couple minutes ago about a lot of this being related to visibility into the industry and what games are coming out, you don't have to play every single one of these games. Just pick one, pick a couple, pick a few, whatever you want to do. Because for all of the hundreds of Metroidvanias, all the hundreds of roguelike games that are out, there are also plenty of games that aren't. There's a lot of variety out there in the game industry right now, especially with indies. I want to keep shouting out indies because there are some really creative games that are constantly coming out. And yeah, some of them do jump on those trends of adding popular mechanics because there's already an established audience that likes those games, that, you know, they might be like, oh, let's do this and see if we can, you know, get some sales there. Like, for example, one example I could think of is the Aggro Crab Studio. I just thought of this now. They had worked on Another Crab's Treasure. I think they had some other games. Another Crab's Treasure, I think, sold okay, right? Being a Souls-like game where you're playing as the crab underwater. I think it's super cute. I do want to check it out at some point. They made Peak, which Peak, from what I understand, is an online co-op game. Very popular genre, and that game has sold like crazy. That game was huge. That was one of the biggest... That's got to be one of the biggest indie games of 2025, for sure. Because they were like, all right, let's make a game that maybe is a little more popular of a genre. They probably looked at the market and said, all right, this might do super well. And it did. You know, whereas a Souls-like... I mean, Souls games, let's be honest, are more of a niche series. More aligned with hardcore gamers. Online co-op, especially with streamers, that's probably gonna be a little more successful, at least just basing it off of the metrics on the surface level. Of course, it comes down to the semantics about whether it'll succeed or not, and like with the Concord situation, it really comes down to the timing of the release as well. That can really have a big impact on it. But there's a lot of factors that go into, you know, I'm saying this as someone who's not a game developer, right? This is just me as a consumer looking in from the outside. There's a lot of seemingly different factors that go into these decisions about how companies want to make these games. And like in some of the cases, for sure, it's going to be chasing trends. But I do think a lot of it, especially in the indie scene, will come down to, hey, this would be a cool idea. Let's do a roguelike mode where you just auto-attack and gain different upgrades that way, aka Vampire Survivors, which, by the way, there's a lot of Survivors-like games. That's a whole subgenre now, I guess. Just taking inspiration from that game. Let's take roguelike mechanics and add it to a card-based game, aka Balatro. Like, there's roguelike mechanics in an adventure game, aka Blueprints. Like, there's a lot of these situations where I think different developers are looking at these almost like combinations of like, how can we take elements from different games, combine them into one? And so when you kind of break apart games that way, they can seem less creative. It can be more fatiguing because you're like, oh, this is just like so-and-so game combined with so-and-so game. Technically, yes, but when you look at the variety and you look at the combination of those elements in a game as a whole, I think that fatigue can kind of wear off less. I do think I think personally there is creativity in combining elements of other games into a completely different experience. And I think that's where a lot of creativity, especially in the indie scene, and even in AAA sometimes, I think that's where that creativity can come from. You know, this day and age, there's not a ton of completely original game ideas. When there are, they're awesome and it's super revolutionary and cool. But there's also creativity in combining beloved elements from other games, combining them into one. But then on the flip side, you have these companies chasing trends and not really doing it for the sake of creativity. So it really comes down to the intentions of the developers and the publishers as well when it comes to these games. You know, I'm not going to look at Concord and necessarily say that that was a creative approach for their team. Like, I look at that, I mean, I didn't play the game, let me know in the comments below if I'm wrong about that. I look at that and I'm like, oh, they're just trying to do an Overwatch 8 years after the fact. Like, you know, not, I don't know. I feel like looking back on it, it wasn't the smartest idea to release it, but they probably spent so much money on it, and they did, and lo and behold, we got it. Yeah, I don't know. Overall, I don't even know what I'm going to call the title of this video. There's so many factors that go into, you know, marketing for games, what game elements come together into a final product, and I would love to say all the time it's a creative vision. But clearly, as we know, the game industry is run on capitalistic ideals, and that is very much not always the case. Indies, I feel like, get a little more the benefit of the doubt, but also they probably do chase trends a little bit to try to gain more of an audience. You know, indies really need a big audience to be successful these days, and especially to stand out from all the other games that are coming out. And so it's one of those things where it's a double-edged sword, right? That's the short answer to the video topic here. There is trend chasing, but there's also creative vision. It really comes down to the intents of the developers and the publishers and kind of how you perceive it as a gamer. All I will say is that, yes, it's okay to feel fatigued on a certain genre, but don't criticize the game. If it's good, if it's fine, if other people like it, just move on. Play other games. There's a million other games you can choose from, you know, that won't have those mechanics or will have those mechanics in a fresh, new way. You know, I didn't really get into roguelikes because I didn't like earlier roguelike games like Binding of Isaac, but then I played Vampire Survivors and I fell in love with roguelike games because of that. And BALL I really like too. So it really comes down to, you know, just, I think, intentions of developers and also just your perspective as a consumer. Really how you want to take that on. But anyways, I mean, this is a deep topic. Definitely let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Are there certain genres of games that you are personally fatigued by these days? Are there certain games that, you know, were kind of a creative mashup of genres that you actually really ended up liking the blend of them or didn't like even? Let me know all of your thoughts on this in the comments below. Otherwise, I will catch you all on the next video or live stream. And until then, keep on gaming. Don't get fatigued. Play indie games. There's a lot of variety there. See you later.